Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool metal of the transport shuttle's window, watching the massive structure of the Celestial Academy grow larger as they approached. The Academy floated in the void between three-star systems, a monument to knowledge that housed the greatest collection of artifacts and wisdom from across the galaxy. Students from over 800 different species came here to learn about the rise and fall of civilizations, the mysteries of lost technologies, and the delicate balance that kept the Galactic Coalition functioning. As a human from the outer colony world of New Terra, Elena knew she was lucky to be here. Humans were still considered a young species by galactic standards, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago when the Veiltharian Confederation found them struggling with basic space exploration. The Veiltharians had taken pity on humanity, offering them a place in the greater galactic community as junior members. Most humans were grateful for this guidance, but Elena had always wondered why her species seemed to lag so far behind others in technological development when they showed such remarkable adaptability in other areas. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, and Elena gathered her belongings. Her roommate assignment indicated she would be sharing quarters with a Zephyrian named Kixtal, whose species was known for their incredible memory and analytical abilities. She hoped they would get along well. The Academy's main corridor took Elena's breath away. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, supported by pillars that seemed to be carved from single pieces of crystallized starlight. Holographic displays showed the locations of various exhibits and lecture halls, while students of dozens of different species moved through the space with practiced ease. Elena recognized the tall, willowy Altarians with their silver skin, the crystalline resonants who communicated through harmonic frequencies, and the bear-like Ursans whose strength was legendary throughout the galaxy. Following the directions on her personal datapad, Elena made her way to the student dormitories. Her room was small but comfortable, with 2 sleeping alcoves, a shared study area, and a small kitchenette that could prepare food suitable for most galactic species. Kixtal hadn't arrived yet, so Elena unpacked her few belongings and prepared for her first day of classes. The next morning, Elena's first class was Comparative Civilizations and Their Artifacts, taught by Professor Yolandra, a Veiltharian scholar who was considered one of the foremost experts on extinct species. The classroom was actually a vast museum space, with display cases containing artifacts from dozens of dead civilizations arranged throughout the room. Professor Yolandra was an impressive figure even by Veiltharian standards. Her people were tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. She wore the traditional academic robes of her species, which seemed to shimmer with an inner light. "Welcome, students, to the study of those who came before us," Professor Yolandra began, her voice carrying easily through the large space. "In this room you will find artifacts from civilizations that reached great heights before falling to war, natural disaster, or their own hubris. Each item tells a story, and each story contains lessons for our current galactic civilization." Elena found herself fascinated as the professor led them through the displays. There were weapons from the warrior culture of the extinct gladiatorial worlds, beautiful artwork from the Pacifist Harmony Collective that had been destroyed by a supernova, and technological devices from the mysterious builders whose massive construction still dotted certain sectors of the galaxy despite their creators having vanished millions of years ago. It was when they reached a display case near the back of the room that Elena's world suddenly shifted. Inside the case, among what Professor Yolandra described as primitive tools and ornaments from various extinct primitive species, was a small medallion that made Elena's heart stop. The medallion was made of a silver-colored metal and bore an intricate design, a tree with 7 branches, each branch ending in a different symbol, with a star shining above the topmost branch. Around the edge of the medallion were symbols that looked almost like letters, though not in any alphabet Elena recognized from modern galactic scripts. But she did recognize the medallion itself. It was identical to the one that hung in her grandmother's kitchen on New Terra, the one that had been passed down through generations of the Vasquez family. Her grandmother had always said it was a family heirloom from the old days, though she had never explained what the old days meant. Elena had assumed it was from Earth's ancient history, perhaps something her ancestors had brought with them when they left their homeworld. "Professor," Elena raised her hand, her voice barely steady. "Could you tell us more about that medallion?" Professor Yolandra followed Elena's gaze to the artifact in question. "Ah, yes. That particular piece is believed to be from a primitive species that existed in the Outer Rim territories several thousand years ago. They showed some promise in metallurgy and artistic design, but ultimately failed to advance beyond basic spaceflight before their civilization collapsed. The exact cause of their extinction is unknown, though most scholars believe they likely destroyed themselves in warfare, as many primitive species do when they develop technology faster than wisdom." Elena's mind raced. The Outer Rim territories were where many human colonies, including New Terra, were located. But humans had only been in space for 2 centuries, not thousands of years, and the medallion in the display case wasn't primitive at all. Up close, she could see that the metalwork was incredibly sophisticated, with details so fine they would challenge even modern manufacturing techniques. "What was this species called?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Professor Yolandra consulted her datapad. "The academic designation is Species Classification Unknown, 4-7. They left no written records that we have been able to decipher, and their artifacts are quite rare. This medallion was discovered in a ruined site in the Kepler Nexus system about 50 years ago." The Kepler Nexus system. Elena knew that name. It was only 3 light-years from New Terra. In fact, her grandmother had mentioned that their family originally came from a world in that system before moving to New Terra when her great-grandfather was young. After class, Elena lingered behind, pretending to take notes while the other students filed out. When she was alone with the display case, she took a closer look at the medallion. The more she studied it, the more certain she became that it was identical to her family's heirloom. Not similar, identical. Down to every tiny detail of the engravings and the specific way the silver had been worked. But how could that be possible? If this was from a species that had gone extinct thousands of years ago, how could her family possess an identical artifact? And why had Professor Yolandra seemed so certain about the timeline and the extinction of this mysterious species? Elena spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely paying attention to her other classes. Her mind kept returning to the medallion and the implications of what she had seen. That evening, back in her dormitory room, she tried to contact her grandmother on New Terra, but the communication lag between the Academy and the Outer Rim colonies meant it would be several hours before she could expect a response. Kickstal had arrived while Elena was at classes, and she found her new roommate arranging crystals in precise geometric patterns on their side of the room. The Zephyrian was smaller than Elena had expected, about the size of a human child, but with delicate, almost insect-like features and large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "You seem troubled, Elena Vasquez," Kickstal observed, their voice producing harmonics that Elena felt as much as heard. "The patterns of your electromagnetic field suggest significant emotional disturbance." Elena had forgotten that Zephyrians could read bioelectric fields. It made them excellent at detecting lies and emotional states, which was both useful and potentially intrusive. "I saw something in class today that doesn't make sense," Elena admitted. "An artifact that looks exactly like something my family owns, but the professor said it was from a species that went extinct thousands of years ago." Kickstal's antennae twitched with interest. "Curious. Have you considered the possibility that your family artifact is a replica or reproduction?" "That's what I thought at first, but the one in the museum looks old. Really old. And the craftsmanship is incredible, more advanced than anything I've seen from modern human technology. Perhaps you should research this extinct species further." "The Academy's archives are extensive, and students have access to most historical records." Elena nodded. "That's a good idea. Do you know how to access the deep archives?" "Indeed. Zephyrian students are often assigned research projects that require extensive historical investigation. I would be willing to assist you if you desire." Elena felt a surge of gratitude. "That would be amazing. Thank you." The next day, instead of attending the optional afternoon seminars, Elena and Kickstal made their way to the Academy's Central Archive complex. The archives were a marvel of information storage technology, containing not just written records, but also holographic recreations of historical events, preserved genetic samples from extinct species, and detailed scans of artifacts from throughout galactic history. They found a private research terminal and began searching for information about species classification unknown. 4-7. What they found was surprisingly sparse for such an apparently significant discovery. The official records indicated that ruins from this species had been found in 12 different star systems, all in the Outer Rim territories. The artifacts suggested a civilization that had achieved interstellar travel and had developed sophisticated metallurgy and energy systems. However, all the ruins showed signs of having been abandoned suddenly, and no bodies or clear indicators of what had happened to the species had been found. Most of the research had been conducted by Valtharian archaeological teams over the past century, with Professor Yolandra herself leading many of the expeditions. The timeline consistently placed the extinction of this species at approximately 3,000 years ago, well before humans had achieved spaceflight. But as Elena and Kickstal dug deeper into the files, they began to notice inconsistencies. The dating methods used seemed unusually varied, and there were several instances where different dating techniques had produced wildly different results. In some cases, carbon dating suggested the artifacts were only a few hundred years old, but these results had been dismissed in favor of other dating methods that supported the 3,000-year timeline. "This is strange," Kixtall observed, their antennae twitching as they processed the information. The dating inconsistencies suggest either significant methodological errors or deliberate manipulation of the data. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "You think someone is deliberately misrepresenting how old these artifacts are?" "It is a possibility, but why would anyone want to do such a thing?" Before Elena could answer, the archive terminal suddenly displayed an access restriction warning. The files they had been viewing were now classified as restricted academic access. Faculty clearance required. Elena stared at the screen in disbelief. These files were open access just a minute ago? Kixtall's multifaceted eyes reflected concern. "Someone is monitoring our research and has restricted our access in real time. This suggests that our investigation has triggered some kind of security protocol?" Elena's mind raced with implications. If someone was actively monitoring and restricting access to information about this extinct species, it suggested that there was something significant about them that certain parties wanted to keep hidden. And if her family somehow possessed an artifact from this species, then her own heritage might be connected to whatever secret was being concealed. That evening, Elena finally received a response from her grandmother on New Terra. The elderly woman's holographic image flickered slightly due to the long-distance transmission, but her voice came through clearly. "Elena, my dear, it's so wonderful to see you. How are your studies going at the academy?" "They're going well, grandmother, but I need to ask you about something. The family medallion that hangs in your kitchen, do you know anything about its history?" Her grandmother's expression became thoughtful.
"The medallion?"
"Why do you ask, child?" "I saw something very similar in one of my classes, and I'm curious about our family's history." There was a long pause before her grandmother responded. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that Elena had never heard before. "That medallion has been in our family for many generations, Elena. My great-great-grandmother gave it to me before she died, just as her great-great-grandmother had given it to her. She told me stories about where it came from, but I always thought they were just family legends." "What kind of stories?" "She said it came from the old homeworld, before the Great Forgetting. She said our people had once been mighty travelers between the stars, but something terrible had happened and we had to start over. She called it the time when the light went out." Elena's heart pounded. Did she ever mention the name of this old homeworld? "She called it Terra Majora, the Greater Earth." "She said it was in the Kepler Nexus system, but that was before I knew such places really existed. I thought it was just a story." Terra Majora, the Kepler Nexus system. Suddenly pieces began falling into place in Elena's mind. Her family hadn't just randomly ended up in the Outer Rim territories. They were descendants of survivors from whatever had happened to species classification unknown. 4-7. And if her grandmother's stories were true, humans hadn't been discovered by the Veltharians 2 centuries ago. They had been survivors of their own advanced civilization. "Grandmother, do you still have any of those old family stories written down?" "I have some of your great-great-great-grandmother's journals, but they're written in the old script." "I never learned to read it properly. Could you send me copies?" "It might be important." Her grandmother nodded, though she looked puzzled by Elena's urgency. "Of course, dear. I'll have them transmitted to you tomorrow." After the conversation ended, Elena sat in her room, staring at the wall while her mind processed everything she had learned. If her suspicions were correct, then the Galactic Coalition's entire understanding of human history was wrong. Humans weren't a young species that had been discovered and uplifted by more advanced civilizations. They were survivors of an advanced civilization that had somehow been forgotten or deliberately hidden. But who would want to hide such a thing? And why? And what had really happened to Terra Majora and the other human worlds 3,000 years ago? Kixtall entered the room, returning from their evening meal. They immediately noticed Elena's emotional state. "Your bioelectric field suggests extreme agitation mixed with determination," Kixtall observed. "Have you learned something significant?" Elena looked at her roommate, realizing that she needed an ally in whatever investigation lay ahead. "Kixtall, if I tell you something that might be dangerous to know, are you still willing to help me?" The Zephyrians' antennae quivered with what Elena had learned was their equivalent of intense interest. "Knowledge that is dangerous is often the most important knowledge of all. Tell me what you have discovered." Elena took a deep breath and began to explain her growing suspicions about her family's history and the true nature of species classification unknown. 4-7. As she spoke, she watched Kixtall's multifaceted eyes grow brighter with understanding and concern. When Elena finished her explanation, Kixtall was silent for several minutes, processing the implications. "If your theory is correct," Kixtall finally said, then we are not merely investigating academic mysteries. We are uncovering a conspiracy that involves the highest levels of galactic civilization. The Veiltharians, and possibly others, have deliberately concealed the true history of humanity. But why would they do that? Perhaps, Kickstall suggested, they are afraid of what humans might become if they remembered what they once were. Elena felt a chill at those words, but also a growing determination. Tomorrow, she would receive her great-great-great-grandmother's journals, and somehow she would find a way to uncover the truth about humanity's hidden past, no matter how powerful the forces trying to keep it buried. Outside their dormitory window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, keeping their secrets in the darkness between worlds. But Elena Vasquez was no longer content to accept the version of history she had been taught. She was going to find out what really happened to her people, and why the galaxy was so afraid of humans remembering their true heritage. A transmission from New Terra arrived at 0347 Galactic Standard Time, while Elena was deep in restless sleep. She woke to find her personal communicator blinking with an incoming data package marked as Urgent Family Correspondence. Her hand shook slightly as she activated the holographic display to download the files her grandmother had sent. There were 3 journal files, each marked with dates from over 2 centuries ago, along with a short message from her grandmother. Elena, these belong to your ancestor Catalina Vasquez. She was the last one who could read the old script fluently. I hope they help with whatever you're researching. Be careful, my dear. Some family stories were meant to be whispered, not shouted. Elena transferred the files to a secure datapad and gently shook Kickstall awake. Her roommate's multifaceted eyes immediately focused with alert attention. The family documents have arrived, Elena whispered. We need to find somewhere private to examine them. Kickstall's antennae twitched understanding. The deep archive levels have private research chambers that are not monitored during off hours. I know how to access them without triggering security protocols. They made their way through the Academy's corridors in the pre-dawn darkness, using Kickstall's natural ability to sense electromagnetic fields to avoid the automated security patrols. The Zephyrian led them through a series of maintenance passages that eventually opened into the restricted sections of the archive complex. The private research chamber was a small, shielded room designed for handling sensitive historical documents. Kickstall sealed the door and activated the room's privacy protocols before Elena activated her datapad. The first thing that struck Elena about her ancestors' journals was the script itself. While she couldn't read the characters, they had a flowing, organic quality that was unlike any modern human writing system she had seen. The characters seemed to incorporate geometric patterns and symbols that reminded her of the engravings on her family's medallion. The writing system appears to be logographic rather than alphabetic, Kickstall observed, studying the displays. Each character represents concepts rather than sounds. This is typical of more advanced civilizations that develop written language for scientific and philosophical precision rather than simple communication. Can you read any of it? Zephyrian analytical abilities include pattern recognition across multiple linguistic systems. Give me time to establish baseline patterns. As Kickstall worked on deciphering the script, Elena studied the images that accompanied the text. There were detailed star charts showing navigation routes between dozens of star systems, technical diagrams of what appeared to be advanced spacecraft, and architectural drawings of massive construction projects. One image in particular caught Elena's attention. It showed a space station or orbital city of incredible size, easily dwarfing anything in the current Galactic Coalition. The structure was elegant and organic-looking, more grown than built, with sections that seemed to spiral outward from a central core like the branches of an enormous tree. Elena! Kickstall's voice carried excitement and concern in equal measure. I have established basic translation protocols. What I am reading is unprecedented. Tell me. Kickstall's voice took on the formal tone they used for presenting analytical findings. These journals document the final days of what the author calls the Human Federation, a spacefaring civilization that encompassed over 400 star systems. According to these records, this civilization existed for over 1,500 years before its destruction. Elena felt her world tilt. Destruction? What happened to them? The author writes of the Great Betrayal and the Night of Falling Stars. She describes a coordinated attack by something called the Coalition of the Enlightened, which appears to be the predecessor organization to the current Galactic Coalition. The Galactic Coalition attacked humanity? According to these records, yes, but the reason is complex. Your ancestor writes that humans had developed something called quantum consciousness technology, a method of linking human minds across vast distances of space, allowing for instantaneous communication and shared knowledge across the entire Federation. Elena struggled to process this information. That sounds incredible. Why would anyone want to stop that? Kickstall continued reading, their antennae twitching with agitation. The author suggests that the other species feared this technology. She writes, "They say we seek to create a hive mind that will consume all individuality in the galaxy. They do not understand that quantum consciousness amplifies individuality rather than suppressing it. Each human mind becomes a unique note in a vast symphony, contributing their perspective while drawing strength from the whole. So they attacked the Human Federation because they were afraid of this technology? The attack appears to have been systematic and brutal. Your ancestor describes orbital bombardments of major population centers, the destruction of the quantum consciousness network nodes, and what she calls memory purges, some kind of technology that could erase specific memories from human minds. They committed genocide. Not complete genocide, Kickstall clarified, continuing to read. The record suggests that some humans were kept alive, but their memories of the Human Federation and their advanced technology were selectively erased. They were then relocated to primitive colonies where they would have to rebuild their civilization from scratch, while being monitored to ensure they never redeveloped their dangerous capabilities. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. The human colonies in the Outer Rim territories were not pioneers expanding into space or refugees whose memories were stolen. According to this document, yes. Your ancestor was part of a group that managed to escape the memory purges by hiding in the deep spaces between star systems. They established secret colonies and worked to preserve some knowledge of the truth, but their numbers were small and they had limited resources. Elena stood up and began pacing the small chamber. This explains everything. Why humans seem to adapt so quickly to alien technology. Because we once had more advanced technology ourselves. Why we have such strong intuitive abilities in space navigation and engineering. Because it's genetic memory that the purges couldn't completely erase. Kickstall's voice carried a note of warning. Elena, there is more. Your ancestor writes about survivors who maintain some of the old knowledge, including fragments of the quantum consciousness technology. She suggests that this knowledge has been passed down through certain families, hidden within seemingly innocent cultural traditions and artifacts. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her neck where she wore a small pendant her mother had given her, a simplified version of the design on the family medallion. Our family traditions. The medallions, the stories, even the way my grandmother always insisted on maintaining certain rituals. It's all been a way of preserving knowledge. The implications extend beyond your family. If this is true, there may be other human families throughout the galaxy who are unknowingly carrying fragments of this lost knowledge, and if these fragments could be brought together, we could reconstruct the quantum consciousness technology, Elena finished. No wonder the archives were restricted. If the Veltharians know the truth about human history, they would be terrified of humans discovering their own capabilities. Kickstall stood up from the translation console. We need to verify these claims. Family documents, no matter how detailed, could be elaborate fiction. We need independent evidence. Elena nodded. You're right, but where do we look? If this conspiracy involves the highest levels of galactic civilization, any evidence would be heavily classified. Perhaps we should examine the archaeological sites themselves. If the official dating of the ruins is incorrect, there should be physical evidence that contradicts the published timeline. How do we get access to archaeological data that's above our clearance level? Kickstall's multifaceted eyes gleamed with what Elena had learned was their version of a mischievous expression. Zephyrian students often participate in advanced research projects. If we could find a way to join an archaeological expedition to one of these sites, Elena felt a surge of hope. Do you think Professor Yolandra runs student expeditions? Many professors do, as part of advanced coursework, but approaching her directly might be dangerous if she is part of the conspiracy to conceal this information. Elena thought for a moment. What if we approach her with a different angle? I could express academic interest in extinct civilizations and ask to participate in fieldwork. If I don't mention the connection to my family history, she might not realize what we're really investigating. That could work, but we would need to be extremely careful. If your suspicions are correct, Professor Yolandra has spent decades concealing this truth. She would likely notice if students began asking questions that came too close to sensitive information. Elena looked back at the translated journal entries on their display. The weight of her family's hidden history and the implications of the conspiracy pressed down on her. But alongside the fear and anger, she felt something else growing. A fierce determination to uncover the truth and justice for what had been done to her people. Kickstall, Before we approach Professor Yolandra, we need to learn more about quantum consciousness technology. If the journals are accurate, my family might be carrying genetic or cultural memory of how it worked. I need to understand what we're looking for. Agreed. We should also research the current political structure of the Galactic Coalition. If this conspiracy has been maintained for 3,000 years, it would require ongoing coordination between multiple species and institutions. They spent the next several hours deep in research, using Kickstall's access privileges to examine theoretical papers on consciousness, quantum mechanics, and interspecies communication technologies. What they found was disturbing. Several research papers from the past century had explored the theoretical possibility of linking consciousness across space using quantum entanglement, but all such research had been classified as potentially destabilizing to galactic civilization and banned by the Coalition Ethics Council. The official reasoning was that such technology could be used to create hive minds that would eliminate individual autonomy. But as Elena and Kickstall studied the theoretical foundations, they realized that the technology described in the journals was far more sophisticated than anything the current Galactic Coalition understood. Rather than creating a hive mind, the quantum consciousness network appeared to have been designed to enhance individual creativity and problem-solving ability by allowing voluntary connection to a vast shared knowledge base. It's like the difference between a library and a dictatorship, Elena realized. The Coalition fears that humans would use this technology to dominate other species, but the journals suggest it was designed to help everyone reach their full potential. The irony, Kickstall observed, is that by suppressing this technology, the Coalition may have prevented the development of solutions to many current galactic problems. Wars between member species, resource shortages, communication barriers between different types of consciousness. All of these might have been addressed if the Human Federation's research had been allowed to continue. Elena felt a growing anger at the injustice of it all. Not only had her people been nearly destroyed, but the entire galaxy had been deprived of potentially beneficial technology because of fear and prejudice. As the Academy's day shift began, and other students started moving through the corridors, Elena and Kickstall prepared to return to their normal routine. But Elena knew she could no longer simply attend classes and pretend to study galactic history, when the truth was so different from what was being taught. "We need allies," Elena said as they prepared to leave the research chamber. "Other students who might be willing to help us investigate this conspiracy. But we have to be careful about who we trust." Kickstall's antennae twitched agreement. "I may know someone who could assist us. There is another student in our year, Marcus Chen, a human from the inner colonies. His family came from the Outer Rim territories originally, and he has mentioned feeling disconnected from official human history. He might be sympathetic to our investigation." "Anyone else?" "Varish Thulon, an Altarian studying xenoarchaeology. The Altarians have their own complicated relationship with the Veltharian Confederation, and she has expressed skepticism about certain official historical narratives. Her people's memory capabilities are also exceptional, which could be useful for detailed research." Elena nodded. "Let's approach them carefully. We'll start with general conversations about historical mysteries and see how they respond to questioning official narratives." As they made their way back to their dormitory, Elena's mind was already working on how to approach Professor Yolandra about joining an archaeological expedition. She would need to seem academically curious but not suspicious, interested in the field but not specifically focused on the mysterious species classification unknown. 4-7. But first, she needed to understand more about her own family's hidden knowledge. The journals had mentioned specific rituals and traditions that preserved fragments of the quantum consciousness technology. Elena realized she needed to examine her own cultural heritage with new eyes, looking for hidden meanings in songs, stories, and customs that she had previously taken for granted. That evening, instead of attending the usual social activities that filled students' free time, Elena spent hours in meditation, trying to access deeper levels of memory and intuition. She focused on the family stories her grandmother had told her as a child, the lullabies her mother had sung, the specific ways certain foods were prepared for family gatherings. As she sat in quiet reflection, Elena began to notice patterns she had never seen before. The lullabies contained mathematical sequences that corresponded to quantum mechanics principles. The family stories included navigation references that matched star charts from the journals. Even the way her grandmother arranged flowers in her garden seemed to follow patterns that resembled the technical diagrams Elena had seen. The knowledge was there, hidden in plain sight, passed down through generations of survivors who had found ways to preserve fragments of their lost civilization. Elena realized that she wasn't just investigating ancient history, she was discovering her own heritage and capabilities. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Elena's dreams were filled with visions of vast space cities, human minds linked in networks of shared consciousness, and the brilliant flash of star-spanning civilizations. But underneath the wonder was a growing determination to uncover the truth about what had been taken from her people, and a fierce desire to ensure that the perpetrators of this great crime would finally face justice. The next morning would bring new challenges as she began to carefully approach other students and prepare for her first attempt to gain access to the archaeological sites where the evidence of humanity's true history lay buried. But Elena Vasquez was no longer just a student studying ancient civilizations. She was a survivor of humanity's lost golden age, and she was going to reclaim her people's stolen legacy. 3 weeks had passed since Elena first discovered the medallion in Professor Yolandra's classroom, and her carefully laid plans were finally beginning to bear fruit. Through a combination of exceptional academic performance and what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm for xenoarchaeology, she had managed to secure a place on Professor Yolandra's upcoming expedition to the Kepler Nexus system. The professor had been impressed by Elena's research proposal on comparative technological development patterns in extinct civilizations, which she had crafted to seem academically rigorous while secretly targeting the very sites where evidence of the Human Federation might be found. Elena had spent countless hours in the archives, building a legitimate academic foundation for her interest, while carefully avoiding any direct references that might trigger security protocols. Kickstow had also managed to join the expedition, officially as Elena's research partner, but actually as her co-conspirator in what was becoming an increasingly dangerous investigation. They had successfully recruited Marcus Chen, whose family background made him naturally sympathetic to questions about human history, and Vera Stulan, whose Altarian heritage gave her access to memory techniques that proved invaluable for processing large amounts of historical data. The 4 students had formed what appeared to be a study group focused on collaborative research, but their real meetings took place in hidden locations throughout the academy. During these clandestine gatherings, they had made startling discoveries about the scope of the conspiracy to conceal human history. Marcus had contributed genealogical research showing that many human families throughout the galaxy carried similar artifacts and cultural traditions to Elena's. The pattern suggested that hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of humans carried fragments of preserved knowledge without realizing it. Viraj had used her species' advanced memory techniques to identify subtle inconsistencies in the official historical records. The Altarian student had discovered evidence of systematic data manipulation going back centuries, with key information about archaeological discoveries being altered or suppressed. Most disturbing of all, Kickstow had uncovered evidence that the monitoring and memory manipulation of human populations was ongoing. Hidden within routine medical and psychological evaluations conducted by Coalition Health Services, there were protocols specifically designed to identify and suppress any signs that humans might be recovering their lost memories or capabilities. Now, as their research shuttle approached the Kepler VI system where the expedition would take place, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and terror. They were about to visit what her ancestors' journal suggested was one of the last strongholds of the Human Federation, a world called Terra Majora that had been the site of the final battle against the Coalition forces. Professor Yolandra stood at the front of the shuttle's passenger compartment, addressing the 12 students who had been selected for the expedition. The Veltharian professor looked as elegant and authoritative as ever, but Ayla now noticed subtle details that she had missed before. The professor's eyes held a watchfulness that seemed to go beyond normal academic curiosity, and her movements had the precise, controlled quality of someone who was always maintaining careful discipline over their actions and words. "Students, we are approaching the archaeological site designated as UCR 47 Alpha," Professor Yolandra announced. "This location contains one of the most significant collections of artifacts from the extinct primitive species we have been studying. You will have the opportunity to participate in active excavation and analysis, but remember that this is a restricted site. All findings must be properly documented and submitted through official channels." Elena exchanged glances with Kickstow. The designation UCR-47 Alpha was clearly related to the species classification Unknown 47 from the Academy's displays. They were about to visit the site where evidence of the Human Federation had been discovered and systematically concealed. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Kepler VI, and Elena got her first look at what her ancestors' journals claimed was Terra Majora. The planet was beautiful, with vast blue oceans, green continents, and white polar caps. But as they flew over the main continent, Elena could see enormous scars in the landscape, circular depressions that looked like impact craters but were far too large and numerous to be from natural meteorite strikes. "Orbital bombardment sites," Virish whispered to Elena, her Altarian memory allowing her to recognize the geological signatures. "These craters match the descriptions from your ancestors' journals." The shuttle landed at a research station built into what appeared to be the ruins of an enormous structure. Elena could see sections of crystalline walls emerging from the ground, and metalwork that showed the same sophisticated craftsmanship as her family's medallion. But most of the site had been carefully excavated in a way that seemed designed to remove evidence rather than preserve it. Professor Yolandra led the students on a tour of the active excavation areas, explaining the official interpretation of what they were seeing. According to the professor, the ruins represented a primitive civilization that had managed to achieve basic spaceflight before destroying itself in tribal warfare. But Elena could see that the reality was very different. The architecture was incredibly advanced, incorporating design principles that wouldn't look out of place in the most sophisticated coalition cities. The metalwork showed evidence of manufacturing techniques that exceeded anything currently known to galactic science, and hidden among the debris, Elena spotted symbols and designs that matched those in her ancestors' journals. During the lunch break, while Professor Yolandra was occupied with the graduate research assistants, Elena and her allies managed to slip away from the main excavation site. Using Elena's knowledge from the family journals, they made their way to an area that her ancestor had described as the Hall of Memory, the central node of Terra Majora's quantum consciousness network. What they found took Elena's breath away. Hidden beneath a collapsed section of the main structure was a chamber that had somehow escaped the systematic destruction that had claimed the rest of the site. The walls were covered in the flowing script that Elena recognized from her family's journals, and at the center of the room stood a device that could only be the quantum consciousness interface her ancestor had written about. The device was beautiful and alien, yet somehow familiar. It consisted of a series of crystalline structures arranged around a central pillar, with channels carved into the floor that seemed designed to guide some kind of energy flow. The crystals still held a faint luminescence, suggesting that some power source remained active after 3,000 years. "This is it," Elena whispered. "This is the technology that the Coalition was so afraid of." Kixtel moved closer to the device, their antennae twitching with excitement. The crystalline structures appear to be quantum resonance amplifiers. They would be capable of detecting and enhancing neural quantum states across vast distances. Marcus was examining the wall inscriptions. "Elena, some of these symbols match markings my grandmother has on an old family cup. I never knew what they meant, but now they're instructions," Vera said, her Altarian memory allowing her to process the complex symbolic language. "Operating procedures for the quantum consciousness network. Your families have been preserving the operating manual for 3,000 years. Elena approached the central device, feeling a strange resonance as she got closer. The crystal structures began to glow more brightly, responding to her presence. As she reached out to touch the central pillar, she felt a tingling sensation that seemed to reach directly into her mind. Suddenly, Elena was no longer standing in the ruined chamber. She found herself in the same space, but as it had existed thousands of years ago. The room was filled with light and activity, and she could see human figures moving through the space with purposeful grace. But more than that, she could sense their thoughts and emotions, their hopes and fears, their incredible sense of connection to something vast and beautiful. The vision lasted only a few seconds, but it left Elena with absolute certainty about what had happened to her people. The quantum consciousness network hadn't been a tool for domination or control. It had been a way for humans to share their creativity, their problem-solving abilities, and their compassion across the stars. It had been the foundation of a civilization that had been on the verge of solving the greatest challenges facing galactic society, and it had been destroyed by those who feared what humanity might become if they were allowed to reach their full potential. "Elena," Marcus's urgent whisper brought her back to the present. "We need to go. I can hear Professor Yolandra calling for us." Elena reluctantly stepped away from the device, but not before using her datapad to record as much as possible of the chamber and its contents. They had found proof of the conspiracy and evidence of humanity's lost capabilities, but now they needed to figure out how to use this information without getting themselves killed or mind-wiped. As they made their way back to the main excavation site, Elena's mind raced with plans and possibilities. The quantum consciousness device had responded to her presence, suggesting that the genetic and cultural memories preserved by the survivor families might be enough to reactivate the technology. If they could find other families with preserved knowledge and bring them together. But first they needed to survive the rest of the expedition and get this evidence back to the Academy without alerting Professor Yolandra or her confederates to what they had discovered. The afternoon proceeded normally, with Elena and her allies maintaining careful facades of academic interest, while Professor Yolandra continued her guided tour of the sanitized sections of the ruins. Elena noticed that the professor seemed to be watching her more closely than before, but she couldn't tell if this was normal academic attention or something more suspicious. It wasn't until they were preparing to return to the shuttle that Elena realized they had made a critical error. Professor Yolandra approached her with expression that mixed curiosity with concern. "Elena, I noticed that you seem particularly drawn to this site. Your questions today showed an unusual depth of insight into the theoretical capabilities of this extinct species. Elena's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I find extinct civilizations fascinating, Professor. The mystery of how they achieved so much and then disappeared completely. Indeed. It is curious how some students develop such strong intuitive understanding of civilizations they have never studied before. Professor Yolandra's dark eyes seemed to see right through Elena's careful facade. Perhaps we should discuss your research interests in more detail when we return to the academy. Elena nodded politely, but inside she was terrified. The professor's tone suggested that Elena's cover might have been blown. And if Professor Yolandra suspected what they had discovered in the hidden chamber, there was no telling what measures might be taken to silence them. As the shuttle lifted off from Terra Majora, Elena looked back at the ruins that had once been the crown jewel of human civilization. Hidden somewhere in those damaged structures was the key to restoring humanity's lost heritage and capabilities. But between Elena and that goal stood a conspiracy that had successfully concealed the truth for 3 millennia, and she was beginning to realize just how dangerous her enemies really were. That evening, as the expedition shuttle made its way back through hyperspace toward the academy, Elena called a secret meeting with her allies in a storage compartment that was shielded from electronic surveillance. The 4 students huddled together in the cramped space, speaking in whispers while sharing their discoveries and fears. Professor Yolandra definitely suspects something, Marcus reported. I saw her reviewing our academy records during the flight back. She's been accessing files that go way beyond normal student information. Vera's Altarian memory allowed her to recall details with perfect clarity. I observed her communicating with someone outside the expedition using encrypted channels. The conversation lasted 17 minutes and included references to security protocols and memory evaluation procedures. Kixtal's antennae drooped with worry. The bioelectric fields around Professor Yolandra have been showing increasing levels of stress and determination. Whatever she is planning, she considers it very important. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had started this investigation out of curiosity about her family's history, but now she realized she might have stumbled into something that could determine the future of humanity itself. We need to get this information to other humans before they can stop us, Elena said. If Professor Yolandra suspects what we've discovered, we might not have much time before they try to suppress our memories or worse. How do we contact other survivor families without going through coalition communication systems? Marcus asked. Elena thought about her grandmother's network of old friends and relatives scattered across the Outer Rim colonies. Many of them maintained informal communication networks that operated outside official coalition monitoring. My grandmother knows people throughout the outer colonies. If we can get a message to her without it being intercepted, she might be able to spread the word to other families who carry preserved memories. That's assuming we can get back to the academy without being detained, Virus pointed out. If Professor Yolandra has contacted security forces, they could be waiting for us when we arrive. Kickstal suddenly straightened, their multifaceted eyes bright with an idea. There may be another option. Zephyrian diplomatic protocols include provisions for asylum requests based on academic freedom violations. If we can present evidence that our research has uncovered suppression of historical truth, my people might be obligated to protect us. Elena felt a surge of hope. Would the Zephyrian government really stand up to the Valtharian Confederation over something like this? Zephyrians value knowledge and truth above all other considerations. If we can prove that the Valtharians have been systematically suppressing important historical information, it would be considered a grave violation of galactic academic ethics. Then that's our backup plan, Elena decided. We'll try to return to the academy normally and get our evidence off-world through my grandmother's network. But if we're detected, we'll claim asylum with the Zephyrian embassy. As the students prepared to leave their hidden meeting space, Elena realized that the next few days would determine whether humanity's lost heritage could be restored or whether the conspiracy would succeed in burying the truth forever. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the forces arrayed against them were powerful beyond imagination. But Elena also felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of connection to the vast network of human consciousness that had once spanned the stars. Somewhere in the quantum depths of space and time, the consciousness of her ancestors was still reaching across the void, offering guidance and strength to those brave enough to reclaim their stolen legacy. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The shuttle docked at the Academy at precisely 1400 hours Galactic Standard Time, and Elena could immediately sense that something was wrong. Instead of the usual casual debriefing that followed archaeological expeditions, they were met by a full security detail led by Director Zalmoth, the Academy's Valtharian head of student affairs. Elena's heart pounded as she watched Professor Yolandra approach Director Zalmoth with what appeared to be a detailed report. The two Veiltharians spoke in hushed tones while the students waited in the shuttle bay, and Elena could see other security personnel positioning themselves strategically around the area. "Bioelectric signatures indicate extreme alertness and preparation for conflict," Kickstall whispered. "They are preparing for some kind of confrontation." Elena made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting to see what Professor Yolandra and Director Zalmuth had planned, she activated her personal communicator and sent an emergency signal to her allies using a code they had established for exactly this situation. Within moments, the shuttle bay erupted into carefully orchestrated chaos. Arcus triggered a minor systems malfunction in the shuttle's power grid, causing emergency lights to activate and creating confusion among the security personnel. Varish used her Altarian agility to slip through the crowd and position herself near the bay's secondary exit. And Kickstall activated every Zephyrian diplomatic immunity protocol they could access, demanding immediate contact with their species embassy representatives. In the confusion, Elena managed to access a maintenance terminal and upload all of their research data to a quantum-encrypted transmission that would be automatically sent to multiple destinations throughout the galaxy if she failed to cancel it within 20.5 hours. It was a desperate gambit, but if the conspiracy tried to silence them, the truth would still survive. Director Zalmoth's voice cut through the chaos. Students Elena Vasquez, Kickstall of the Seventh Harmony, Marcus Chen, and Varish Thulon, you will accompany security personnel for immediate questioning regarding irregular activities during the recent archaeological expedition. Elena realized that Professor Yolandra must have been monitoring them more closely than they had realized. But she also knew that they had one advantage. The professor and her confederates still didn't know exactly how much they had discovered or how they had obtained access to the hidden chamber on Terra Majora. "I invoke student rights and demand the presence of a neutral academic advocate," Elena called out, using protocols she had memorized for exactly this situation. "Academic advocate protocols do not apply to matters of galactic security," Director Zalmoth replied coldly. "Your activities have triggered concerns about potential espionage and unauthorized access to classified archaeological sites, but Kickstall's diplomatic immunity claims had reached the Zephyrian embassy, and Elena could see new figures entering the shuttle bay, representatives from multiple species diplomatic corps who had been alerted to the situation. The Academy couldn't simply make students disappear when galactic diplomats were watching. Ambassador Vextari of the Zephyrian Collective approached Director Zalmoth with obvious displeasure. "Director, Zephyrian citizens studying at this academy are under the protection of our diplomatic agreements. Any questioning must be conducted with proper oversight and legal representation." Elena seized the opportunity. "Ambassador, we have discovered evidence of systematic suppression of historical information that violates galactic academic freedom agreements. We formally request protection under Article 7 of the Academic Truth Preservation Accords." Director Zalmoth's pale blue skin showed the subtle color changes that indicated extreme stress in Veiltharians. These students have been conducting unauthorized research into classified materials. Their activities pose potential security risks to galactic stability. But Elena could see that the arrival of diplomatic representatives had changed the situation dramatically. What had been planned as a quiet detention and memory modification was now a public incident involving multiple species embassies. The conspiracy had been forced to act in the open, and they were not prepared for that level of scrutiny. Ambassador Vix Terry's compound eyes reflected the careful calculation that made Zephyrians such effective diplomats. If these students have discovered evidence of historical suppression, then under galactic law they have the right to present their findings to a neutral academic tribunal. "We demand full diplomatic protection while this matter is investigated." Elena felt a surge of hope, but she also knew that the conspiracy wouldn't give up easily. Even with diplomatic protection, they would face enormous pressure to surrender their evidence and abandon their investigation. Over the next few hours, as diplomatic protocols ground slowly through formal procedures, Elena and her allies found themselves housed in secure quarters within the Zephyrian embassy compound. They were safe for the moment, but Elena knew that powerful forces were working to find ways to neutralize the threat they represented. It was during this tense waiting period that Elena made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing the data they had collected on Terra Majora, she noticed something that had been hidden in the quantum resonance patterns recorded from the consciousness interface device. The crystals in the chamber hadn't just been responding to her presence. They had been attempting to establish a connection, and buried in the quantum static of that attempted connection was a message. Working with Kickstall's analytical abilities and Varish's memory techniques, Elena slowly decoded what appeared to be a transmission from the past. The quantum consciousness network, it seemed, had stored echoes of the final communications from the Human Federation's last survivors. The message was fragmentary but clear. The destruction of the Human Federation hadn't been complete. Some humans had escaped the Coalition's attack, and established hidden colonies in unexplored regions of the galaxy. More importantly, they had taken with them complete copies of the quantum consciousness technology and had been working for 3,000 years to prepare for the day when humanity would be ready to reclaim its heritage. Elena's hands shook as she processed the implications. The scattered survivor families throughout the galaxy weren't just carrying fragments of preserved knowledge. They were part of a vast, hidden network of humans who had been quietly rebuilding their civilization while staying hidden from Coalition surveillance, and the quantum consciousness technology that the Coalition had tried to destroy was still operational, maintained by generations of survivors who had been waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. That moment, Elena realized, had finally arrived. She activated the emergency communication protocols her grandmother had taught her, using quantum encryption methods that had been passed down through her family for generations. The response came faster than Elena had expected, and from far more sources than she had imagined possible. Hidden settlements throughout the galaxy began confirming receipt of her transmission. Space habitats and asteroid fields, underground cities on unexplored worlds, even disguised installations within Coalition space itself. The Human Federation hadn't died 3,000 years ago. It had gone into hiding and had been growing in secret ever since. Elena found herself speaking with representatives of human communities she had never known existed. The Void Builders, who had spent centuries constructing massive space habitats in the empty regions between star systems. The Deep Miners, who had established cities in the cores of dead planets, where Coalition sensors couldn't detect them. The Star Wanderers, who lived aboard massive generation ships that had been traveling through unexplored space for thousands of years. Each community had preserved different aspects of human technology and knowledge. The Void Builders had mastered construction techniques that surpassed anything in Coalition space. The Deep Miners had developed resource extraction and manufacturing capabilities that could support massive populations in hostile environments. The Star Wanderers had maintained the most complete records of pre-war human history and culture. Most importantly, all of these communities had been working together, connected by quantum consciousness networks that operated below the threshold of Coalition detection. They had been waiting for 3 millennia for the day when humans within Coalition space would begin to recover their memories and capabilities. Elena's investigation hadn't just uncovered evidence of ancient history. It had triggered the activation of a vast resistance network that had been preparing for this moment across dozens of generations. But as the scope of the hidden human civilization became clear, so did the magnitude of the threat they faced. The Coalition's fear of human capabilities hadn't been paranoia, it had been justified. If the hidden human communities revealed themselves and merged their knowledge with the awakening consciousness of humans throughout Coalition space, humanity would indeed become the dominant force in galactic civilization. The conspiracy to suppress human memory and capabilities wasn't just about preventing competition. It was about preventing a revolution that would completely reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Elena realized that she was no longer just investigating her family's history. She had become the catalyst for a transformation that would either restore humanity to its rightful place among the stars or trigger a war that could tear galactic civilization apart. The quantum consciousness network was already beginning to awaken among humans throughout Coalition space. Elena could feel it, a growing sense of connection and shared purpose that was spreading from mind to mind as buried memories began to surface and long-dormant capabilities began to reassert themselves. On New Terra, Elena's grandmother reported that the entire human population of the colony was experiencing what they called the remembering, a flood of recovered memories and awakening psychic abilities. Similar reports were coming in from human settlements throughout the galaxy. The Coalition authorities were beginning to notice. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council were being called to discuss concerning developments in human population centers. Valtharian military units were being quietly positioned near major human colonies. And intelligence agencies throughout Coalition space were desperately trying to understand what was happening to their carefully controlled human populations. Elena understood that they had reached a point of no return. The conspiracy that had successfully hidden humanity's true nature for 3,000 years was beginning to collapse, but the forces behind that conspiracy weren't going to surrender without a fight. In her secure quarters within the Zephyrian embassy, Elena received a final transmission from the hidden human networks. The message was simple but profound. The time of hiding is over. Humanity remembers. Are you ready to come home? Elena looked at her allies, Kixtau, whose loyalty had never wavered despite the danger, Marcus and Virash, who had risked everything to help uncover the truth, and the growing network of humans throughout the galaxy who were awakening to their true heritage and capabilities. Outside the embassy, she could see Coalition security forces taking positions. The Valtharian Confederation had clearly decided that the situation had escalated beyond the point where diplomatic nicety could be maintained. They were preparing for some kind of action against the embassy and its protected human residents. But Elena could also sense something else: the growing presence of human consciousness awakening throughout the galaxy. The quantum network that had been dormant for 3 millennia was coming back online, and with it, capabilities that the Coalition had forgotten humanity ever possessed. Elena activated her personal communicator and sent a message that would be received simultaneously by every awakening human mind in the galaxy. "This is Elena Vasquez of the Vasquez family line, speaking to all children of Terra Majora. The time of forgetting is over. The time of remembering has begun. We are no longer alone, and we are no longer weak." Humanity rises. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across hundreds of star systems, millions of human minds suddenly connected in a network of shared consciousness that spanned the galaxy. For the first time in 3,000 years, humanity was truly united. And the Galactic Coalition, which had spent millennia suppressing human potential out of fear, was about to discover what humanity was truly capable of when they were allowed to reach their full potential. The final confrontation was about to begin. The siege of the Zephyrian embassy lasted exactly 17 hours and 43 minutes. Elena would remember every second of it for the rest of her life, not because of the violence or drama, but because it marked the moment when humanity stepped back onto the galactic stage as the power they had always been meant to be. The coalition forces surrounding the embassy represented the combined military might of 7 different species. Led by Valtharian, tactical commanders who had spent centuries perfecting strategies for containing and controlling human populations, they had energy weapons capable of leveling cities, shielding technology that could deflect any known form of attack, and mind control devices designed specifically to override human neural patterns. What they hadn't prepared for was the possibility that humans were far more advanced than they had allowed the galaxy to remember. Elena stood at the embassy's main observation window, watching coalition troops take their positions while feeling the growing presence of human consciousness connecting across the galaxy. The quantum network that had been dormant for 3,000 years was fully operational now, and through it, Elena could sense the awakening of capabilities that humanity had been forced to forget. On New Terra, her grandmother stood in her garden, no longer the frail elderly woman she had pretended to be for decades. The genetic modifications that allowed human minds to interface directly with quantum fields had reasserted themselves, and Elena could feel her grandmother's consciousness blazing like a star as she coordinated with other awakened humans throughout the Outer Rim territories. In the hidden colonies that had preserved the full knowledge of human civilization, massive space habitats were emerging from concealment, their hull configurations more advanced than anything the Coalition had ever seen. Void builders had spent 3 millennia perfecting construction techniques that allowed them to manipulate matter at the molecular level. Their ships weren't just spacecraft. They were expressions of human consciousness made manifest in crystalline metal and quantum-woven energy fields. Deep within asteroid mining operations, the hidden human settlements were revealing manufacturing capabilities that had been operating beneath Coalition notice for generations. Entire fleets of vessels unlike anything in galactic records were launching from facilities that sensors had never detected. These ships moved through space without conventional propulsion, powered by controlled manipulation of the quantum vacuum itself, and throughout Coalition space, millions of humans were discovering that the limitations that had defined their species for centuries had been artificially imposed. Human minds, when functioning at their true potential, could process information at speeds that made even Zephyrian analytical abilities seem sluggish. Human bodies, when enhanced by their natural quantum interface capabilities, could survive in environments that would kill most other galactic species. Human technology, when developed without the artificial constraints imposed by Coalition oversight, could achieve things that had been dismissed as impossible by galactic science. Elena felt all of this happening simultaneously as the quantum consciousness network allowed her to experience the awakening of her entire species. But she also sensed something else: the growing fear among Coalition leaders as they began to understand what they had really been dealing with for the past 3,000 years. The communication came through official diplomatic channels, but Elena could hear the barely controlled panic in Director Zelmoth's voice as he made what was clearly intended as a final ultimatum. "Human students, you will surrender yourselves for processing and memory modification within 1 hour, or Coalition forces will be forced to take action against the Zephyrian embassy for harboring dangerous fugitives." Ambassador Vextari's response carried the formal dignity of Zephyrian diplomacy, but Elena could sense the amusement underneath. "Director Zalmuth, we must respectfully decline your request. Our analysis indicates that your assessment of the situation is fundamentally flawed." "Ambassador, do not force us to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Coalition military technology far exceeds anything these primitive humans might possess." Elena stepped forward to the communication station. It was time to end the charade that had lasted for 3 millennia. "Director Zalmoth, This is Elena Vasquez. Before your forces take any action, I think there's something you should see. Elena activated the embassy's external sensors and directed them toward the space around the academy. What the sensors revealed caused audible gasps from everyone watching the displays. The space around the Celestial Academy was no longer empty. Dozens of vessels had materialized from what appeared to be nowhere, their configurations unlike anything in Coalition databases. The ships didn't look built so much as grown, with hull patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living crystal. They moved without visible propulsion, positioning themselves with precision that suggested they were extensions of a single guiding intelligence rather than individual vessels. But more impressive than the ships themselves was what they represented. These weren't vessels from some unknown alien civilization. The quantum resonance signatures were distinctly human, and the consciousness network connecting them was the same one that Elena could feel awakening throughout the galaxy. Elena's people had come home. Director Zalmoth's voice carried a note of desperation that Elena had never heard from a Veltharian before. This is impossible. Human technology is centuries behind Coalition standards. These vessels cannot exist. Elena smiled as she felt the presence of the ship commanders connecting to her consciousness through the quantum network. They were humans who had never forgotten their heritage, who had spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment. Director, I'd like you to meet Captain Sarah Chen Okafor of the New Terra Liberation Fleet. Her family has been waiting a long time to have a conversation with the Veltharian Confederation. The voice that responded carried the authority of someone who had spent lifetimes preparing for this confrontation. Director Zalmoth, this is Captain Chen Okafor. On behalf of the Human Federation in exile, I'm here to discuss the terms under which the Coalition will begin making reparations for 3,000 years of genocide, cultural suppression, and crimes against consciousness. Elena could sense the panic spreading through Coalition command structures as they realized the magnitude of what they were facing. The primitive humans they had been controlling and manipulating weren't just awakening to their true capabilities. They had been planning this moment for millennia. The Human Federation was destroyed, Director Zalmoth said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Human Federation went into exile, Captain Chen Okafor corrected. We've spent 3,000 years preparing for the day when our people would remember who they truly are. That day has arrived. Elena felt a surge of pride as she sensed the scope of what her people had accomplished in the dark spaces between stars. The hidden human civilization wasn't just a collection of survivor settlements. It was a fully functional interstellar federation that had advanced far beyond what they had been capable of before the Coalition's attack. The quantum consciousness technology that had been destroyed on the Human Federation worlds had been rebuilt and improved. Human manufacturing capabilities now allowed them to construct vessels and habitats that were essentially large-scale expressions of conscious intention. Human scientific understanding had advanced to the point where they could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe as easily as Coalition engineers manipulated electromagnetic fields. Most importantly, human society had evolved beyond the competitive individualism that had characterized their pre-war civilization. The quantum consciousness network allowed for forms of cooperation and collective problem-solving that made the most advanced Coalition societies seem primitive by comparison. Director Zalmoth's next words revealed the depth of Veltharian fear about what humanity might become. The Coalition will never accept human dominance of galactic civilization. We will fight to preserve the current order. Elena felt sadness rather than anger at his response. The Veltharians and their allies had spent so long suppressing others out of fear that they couldn't imagine any other way of organizing society. Director, Elena said gently, no one wants human dominance. We want human equality, and we want the same for every species in the galaxy. Through the quantum consciousness network, Elena could sense her people throughout the galaxy beginning to demonstrate capabilities that the Coalition had never imagined possible. Human settlements were revealing technologies that could solve the resource shortages that had plagued galactic civilization for centuries. Human scientists were sharing solutions to environmental and social problems that had seemed intractable. Human artists and philosophers were expressing concepts that opened new possibilities for understanding the nature of consciousness itself. This wasn't a conquest. It was an offering of partnership on equal terms. But Elena also sensed that some within the Coalition leadership were too afraid or too invested in the current power structure to accept this offer. Military forces throughout Coalition space were being mobilized and emergency protocols were being activated that hadn't been used since the original war against the Human Federation. The galaxy was about to witness either the beginning of a new era of cooperation between species, or the start of a war that would make the destruction of the Human Federation look like a minor skirmish. Captain Chen Okafor's voice carried both warning and hope. Coalition forces, you have 1 hour to begin withdrawing your military units and opening diplomatic channels. After that, we will consider your actions to be a declaration of war against the Human Federation and all human populations under Coalition control. Elena felt the weight of history pressing down on this moment. Everything that happened in the next few hours would determine whether galactic civilization would evolve to its next stage or collapse into chaos. But as she stood surrounded by her allies, connected to the consciousness of her awakening people, Elena felt something she had never experienced before: complete certainty about who she was and what she was capable of. She was Elena Vasquez, granddaughter of Terra Majora, inheritor of 3,000 years of preserved knowledge, and one small part of a vast human consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Her people had survived genocide, cultural suppression, and systematic memory modification. They had rebuilt their civilization in the dark spaces between stars, and now they had returned to reclaim their place among the species of the galaxy. The medallion that had started this journey still hung in her grandmother's kitchen on New Terra, but Elena now understood that it had never been just a family heirloom. It had been a beacon, calling across the centuries to the day when humanity would remember what they had once been and could become again. As Coalition forces began their slow withdrawal from around the Zephyrian embassy, and as diplomatic communications opened between the Human Federation and the galactic powers that had suppressed them, Elena felt the future beginning to take shape. It would not be easy. There would be resistance from those who feared change, negotiations that lasted for years, and the difficult work of integrating human capabilities with the existing structures of galactic civilization. But for the first time in 3,000 years, humans would face these challenges as equals, not as suppressed populations struggling to catch up with their betters. Elena looked out at the stars visible through the embassy's observation windows. Somewhere among those points of light were human worlds that had never forgotten their heritage, human communities that were emerging from hiding, and human consciousness awakening to its full potential throughout the galaxy. The age of forgetting was over. The age of remembering had begun, and Elena Vasquez, who had started as a curious student investigating her family history, had become one of the catalysts for humanity's return to greatness among the stars. The academy that had displayed relics of lost civilizations would need new exhibits soon, because the civilizations they had thought extinct had just announced their return, and the galaxy would never be the same again. As Elena felt the quantum consciousness network connecting her to millions of awakening human minds, she smiled and whispered the words that her ancestor had written in the journals 3,000 years ago. The light that went out has been rekindled. We are home.